This is the first and what we hope is a long series of lectures based on creative entrepreneurialism. And once again, thanks everybody for coming, all you from DAP and from other schools and outside in the community. Also a special thanks to Stephanie Kraby Avalos from the Burgoyne Foundation, who has helped fund some of our entrepreneurial activities that we have going on inside of DAP, and also they've helped fund some of the technology labs that we have through the School of Design. My name is Steve Dohler, and I'm an industrial design faculty member and serial entrepreneur. And so I am also the lead for a new initiative inside of DAP called the Creative Entrepreneurial Initiative. And what we're trying to do here is expose the students to alternatives to working for someone and what it takes to work for yourself. And so what I would like to do is, at this point, introduce our panelists for today. First off, we have Cheryl Woodhouse, who is a artist and creative business strategy consultant. Stevie Carr, a strategic consultant focusing on advancing humans through a whole self wellness. Amy Tuttle, a nonprofit leader that uses the arts as stimulus for international community problem solving. And Jessica Hemmer, a serial entrepreneur, and we'll get into that a little bit later. She works with Procter & Gamble's global design as a design manager, explores the what ifs in materials and process applications. So we've got a really interesting group, and maybe you can say a little bit more about yourselves if you'd like.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Super. I'm Cheryl Woodhouse. I've spent most of my 30-year career founding, managing, and growing creative and mission-driven companies. My first company was a recycled production art studio at the start of the green products movement, which I had for 15 years with 7 employees, and we also employed people with developmental disabilities. And then I also was the COO of a PR firm in the global music and music tech world, where I helped the team grow very fast. We went from 7 to 20 employees, tripled our revenues and quadrupled our profits. And even though I started out my career as an artist, I learned pretty quickly that I was better at the business side. And I think today I want to talk about how beautiful it is to create a company. And that it is, you're creating something that didn't exist before. And there's a lot of excitement in that as well.
Thank you. I'm Stevie Gable Carr. I'm the founder and CEO of Wise Wellness Guild. We're a platform aimed at advancing humans through whole self wellness. We are a social impact company that is really focused on supporting the community building of wellness, but doing it in a profitable manner. So bringing the social impact portion to also business. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that today. We support over 400 women and minority-owned businesses across 50 states and 9 countries, and we work with billion-dollar companies to help to bring those organizations to have a seat at the table. We're doing Kroger Wellness Festival this summer, so we do a lot of the strategic endeavors there, do a lot of employee engagement internally, and have a wellness marketplace that you can check out. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amy Tuttle, and happy to see your faces today. Thank you for coming to support us and also just to be in this space of learning and conversation. Looking forward to a future of Q&A with folks in the room too. So thank you for being here. I serve as the executive director for Wordplay Cincy, which is a local nonprofit. We're really focused on storytelling, and so storytelling is a huge part of my life. Working in the nonprofit sphere, which has been my career path for the past chunk of time, is really interesting because business skills are necessary. We need them. We thrive inside of them. Sometimes we forget that we need them. And so something that I really am focused on is also this like internal work, how to make nonprofit work more effective, more efficient, highly creative, zesty even. And so those are some things I'm coming to the table with here. I also do a lot of global based work. Maybe that will come up in conversation too. Yeah.
Hi, and my name's Jessica Hemmer, and I, as Steve had said, I work for Procter & Gamble, but I didn't always do that. I went to school here for fashion design product development, and I worked in the apparel industry for about 15 years before I joined P&G. In that time, I worked for all sorts of different companies. I kind of bopped around a little bit. I worked in high-end men's outerwear and then intimate apparel, and then I did some time at Under Armour, and then I bopped up to New York for a little bit, working for a company called Woolrich, which is a 200-year-old American heritage company. And then I went to Boston, and I did internal design consulting for a thermoplastic adhesive company that worked with like Nike and Under Armour and Lululemon and Adidas and the North Face and Oakley and Patagonia and all sorts of really amazing companies. And then shortly after that, I moved back to Cincinnati and I started my own company. And so for 5 years, I did design consulting on my own. And then I was scooped up by Procter & Gamble, and I was able to take a lot of those entrepreneurial skills along with a lot of the technical skills that I have and create a role for myself at P&G, which is kind of unique. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll talk about how you can make the transition back and forth between, both a big corporation as well as entrepreneurship and how they actually feed into each other. So,
Excellent. That was great. One thing that's interesting is between Stevie and Jessica, Stevie started at Procter & Gamble and moved into her own business. Jessica went from her own business into Procter & Gamble, and they're both very entrepreneurial people. So when we think about entrepreneurialism, we're not just thinking about, is this what I do when I have my own business? You can be very entrepreneurial when you're out and working for someone. So let's get down to it. First question. So Cheryl, what are the advantages and disadvantages to the upbringing of creatives going into entrepreneurial careers? And what I mean by upbringing is that a lot of us in this sphere didn't just step into it, it was kind of in our blood. And we had a certain type of upbringing around that, a mental upbringing, a cognitive upbringing. So maybe you can talk about, that as it relates to entrepreneurialism.
Sure. I don't know if you all have had this experience in your childhood, but I know in mine there was lots of empty space. There was lots of creative time to experiment, to play, to sort of be on our own, and I think that is a huge advantage when people are creative. They might not be playing sports. There's just a lot of empty time to sort of invent things and make it up. And I think that's a very positive thing. But I also think when we're super creative, we also feel like business is bad. Like, we don't like that stuff. That's numbers, that's organization, it's cramping my style. And so, but I think the biggest disadvantage then is the mindset, because really without business, you're not empowered to make a living doing what you love to do. And many of the things that you need to know to run a business, one can learn. That doesn't mean you want to learn them, and that's okay. But it means then you need to partner with people who have those skills. And something I've really learned over time, that when you have a super creative person and you get together with somebody who's organized and business-minded, that 1 + 1 does not equal 2. When you have an equal partnership with a highly creative individual and a highly organized individual, it's magic. And so I think that you do not have to think that you have to do it on your own. And it's a real disadvantage to not frame your mindset that business is empowerment. And if it helps, you can separate it from the word corporate It doesn't have to be that if you have that feeling in your head. It's empowerment, and the business is how you're going to do what you love, and I think that's super exciting. And one more thing I think I'd like to say, and I think this is my experience, is I started out my career as an artist, and then I discovered I was much better at business. And I love the creativity of entrepreneurship. And if it helps, you can really think, instead of crafting this piece of music, or in addition to crafting my art, my story, my screenplay, whatever it is, I'm also crafting a business. And there is excellence and artisanship in crafting an organization that will provide jobs for people. And it's extremely satisfying, the same way it's satisfying to create art and design.
Anybody else want to try?
I was just going to add, I mean, I think that your point on creating space, there's so much that I can remember back to myself growing up, thinking about being in spaces that it was encouraged for me to explore and to fail and to test things out. And I think that one of the most beautiful parts about entrepreneurship is that when you have a nugget of an idea, that you can bring that to life, and you don't have to have any other stakeholders, right? Except for understanding truly the end user and the impact. And I know that when I was going through DAP, that was one of the things. I also studied fashion design, the design track here, and I fell in love with the psychology of brand building and the habits and practices of individuals, why they do the things they do. But I had this skill in design that I was so good at, and I was magnificent, if I do say so myself, at telling a story. And so when you think about all of these skills that you have, and it's encouraged in a space like this in DAP to build stories and tell people and envision and kind of be divergent thinkers, I think that that's the beauty of being an entrepreneur, is you can grab one of those, and no matter what happens in your career, if you're at a corporation and they're doing layoffs, or if you're at, you start a business and it fails, you've got so much inside of you as a designer and creativity that you can go and do anything you want. And that's that entrepreneurial spirit of like, no matter what, it's always available to you to go lift something out. And I think that's just the part that was really birthed from when I was a kid, but DAP really expanded that for me majorly.
I'm going to kind of take it in a little bit of a different direction. So I actually am dyslexic, and I was actually very recently diagnosed with ADHD. So if we talk about the creative upbringing, I think that a lot of the things that I had as detriments growing up were actually I would refer to them as my superpowers now. So those are the things that really help me to have a different perspective, and that different perspective helps me to like frame problems completely differently than the people that I work with. Kind of like tooting my own horn a little bit too. I'm very often asked by like my leadership, like, I don't know how you think, like that's just so different. Like, can you help us unpack that? Because they're trying to figure out how do they help other people to understand how to think in that same way. So I think the thing that's super interesting is that some of those things that could be seen as detrimental when you're younger, and maybe even like, you're supposed to sit still and you're supposed to, I wasn't a good reader, but I was really good at the creative stuff, and that creativity helped me to like think and see things differently. So more than anything, just like understand that like those things that I know we have varying ages in the group, but like especially if you're early in your college career, those things that you might think could potentially hold you back could be really good starting points for you to understand how to look differently at problems as you go into your career, whether that's an entrepreneur kind of career, working at a large corporation or a small corporation, or working as an entrepreneur. So I feel like I got a little rambly, but.
Well, I think that's a really good segue into the next question. Amy, you do a lot of work in the areas of kind of looking at how to bring the best out of the person. And when we were having lunch, we did have a really interesting talk about ADHD, learning disabilities, and how that may affect somebody going through an entrepreneurial career. And Amy, you want to say a little bit about like what your experiences have been in that area?
Sure. Yeah, great. So, this opportunity to really learn and understand ourselves is a long mission. There's this way in which every single one of us, individually, also collectively, we're constantly on a trajectory of growth. And I think in many ways, it's a primary motivating force of art making and creativity. And something really cool, in my perspective, is happening right now. This trending toward inclusion and toward this space of how can my perceived challenges and weaknesses actually be assets to my growth, to my communication, to finding my niche inside of whatever effort I'm most motivated by. And so loving these stories of like where does neurodivergence fit into the workplace? How do we had this great conversation at lunch. It really caught my attention and my curiosity around clothing and adaptation of comfort through texture, through closures, through ways of scent. And I think there is always this opportunity to gain awareness and understanding of ourselves and our own needs, each other and our needs, and to use creative problem solving to adapt and to make more space for being able to show up fully into the efforts that we love and that we pursue. And I'm so curious about this. I come from a strengths-based culture, organizationally, as well as I would even go as far back to my childhood, how I was raised, this sense of spaciousness and creative development. My parents were both business owners and artists, and I got a front seat to their wild imaginations, to the ways that they really failed and the ways that they succeeded. And ultimately, what I would say about that experience is that I watched them create and world build because they weren't really easily able to navigate larger structures. So both of my parents have GEDs, and they both are incredible, brilliant people who've built multiple businesses and done a whole lot with the arts. And I watched them essentially create safe spaces for themselves and for each other, and for business to thrive, sometimes also to, like I said, fail. And that taught me a lot about, if something doesn't exist that you see yourself inside of, think about creating it. And what would it take to create it? What do you need? Skills, resilience, to understand the times of the day that you work best. And sometimes those don't fit into typical business structures, right? We're I actually have a lot of really great ideas around 2 a.m. when I probably should be sleeping, ideally should be sleeping. But and this is a little bit of a tangent and I'll start to wrap up, but I think now as I am more and more globally connected to creative solution-based work, if I'm awake at 2 a.m. with an interesting idea, chances are so is somebody else that I know. And starting to broaden networks as well. And so what are our assets? What are our strengths? What are our skills? How can we reframe failure and experiences of exclusion for not just for ourselves, but for each other? And what does that look like inside of the building of culture, culture building and world building inside of business, inside of nonprofit work? Yeah, I'll pause there.
Would anybody else like to build off of that? Understanding yourself inside of entrepreneurial ventures.
I have a very practical exercise for you, and that's kind of what I do now as I help creative people build the structure of their business. And there are several lists that I think you should start making as you look at yourself and you start taking your art into a business place. And that is really thinking, what are the tasks and activities that I get lost in that I will do them forever and ever, skipping meals? And then you keep a list, the top 10 things that you absolutely love to do, because this means you're good at it, and this is what you feel you're the best at. And then you take a hard look at the things that you're spinning your wheels on, and you're spending so much time and getting nowhere on them. And so then there's another 2 lists, your top 10 things, your top 10 most time-consuming tasks, and then your top 10 I hate this list. And then what you start to do is you start to find and network with people who can help you do the time-consuming and I don't like this, because that means you're not good at it. It's not your strength, and there's somebody out there who will love to do it. And that might be a business partner, but it could also be an intern from DAP. You know, it could be your neighbor's high school age child who needs some part-time work. But as you go on, keep thinking, how can I delegate these things that are time-consuming and that I don't like to do, so that more and more of your time is spent doing both what you love and what you excel at.
I'll just add on to that, because we had a spirited conversation about this the last time we talked, is the self-awareness piece at a personal level is the thing that I think is the most key, because you can go learn anything on Google. You can teach yourself anything, but I think that what we just heard is, for me, I can speak from 2 areas. One is that I know my financial scarcity, my personal challenges with that have really held me back in the past from being able to scale, because I've never taken investment dollars. I've bootstrapped for the last 4 years with my company and paid myself, below minimum wage for the first 3 of them. So it's not been easy in that regard, but it was because I was really afraid to be beholden to anybody else. And I was really afraid to hire the way that I needed to. So at year 2, I started hiring and said, I'll push off 1 more year and, keep pushing it down the road. When really at the end of the day, if I had taken a step back and said, it's time that we heal this and that we really work through, like, what's all this generational stuff that I've been unpacking, and what's this, and you think about it more as an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset, huge shift in my business. I mean, we grew by almost 300%, to be honest with you. It was wild. The second thing I would say is that my relationship with the difference between leadership and management, huge. When I was in P&G, I really got a close look at the difference, but I was so close to it that I didn't really understand that I don't love hiring people, to be honest with you. I love managing people and I love mentoring people, but I don't love hiring people because people change, but nobody's ever going to do it the way that you want to do it. Nobody will ever love your business as much as you do. That is a fact. And if you even think that, like, from a co-founder standpoint, if it's your idea, you should really just be honest with yourself about that. They might have different skill sets, but they're never going to have the passion that you want. Once I got over that, I think that that's where the self-awareness of it turned from resentment, which I had to be honest about, which is related to my ego, right? Of like, why won't you just do the thing I want you to do and do it the way that I would do it? They're human beings, for the most part, outside of I've automated a lot with AI. But I feel like that the ultimate at the end of the day is that self-awareness, setting myself free, allowed for me to enjoy being a business owner. Honestly, this is the first season that I've been like, I'm back in joy mode again, because I was honest with myself about my own challenges and issues. And I think that that's been the most beautiful part about owning a business now, is actually being in the season of like being, liking to show up every day and doing the work and outsourcing the things that I don't want to do anymore. So.
Everybody else good? Okay. Yeah, that's super interesting. It leads us into the next question. We've talked a lot about that it's really difficult to be entrepreneurial and do it alone. There's a lot of misconception that being an entrepreneur means that you are alone and you're out on this rock and you're doing all this stuff yourself. No risk, no reward, right? And it's all mine. But I think we're starting to hear that partnerships are really valuable inside of this whole realm. So back to Stevie, what do you think about the partnerships? And then also, how do we flip this the stigma in creatives around business from being the evil empire to being a partner that can make us all great and make our abilities help other people?
Oh, I love that question. I'll start with the partnerships first because, again, starting with self-awareness, that the thing that makes me tick is doing things and winning with other people. I don't know if any of you have ever done your Enneagram before. It's your motivators exercise, but I'm a 3, so I like to win, and I like to win a lot. But I like to win with other people and teams, and I actually don't have to be at the helm. I just like to kind of organize and kind of get everybody going. And so I think that has been my spirit of building my company as a whole. We truly are just a connection platform. That's why we've got an entire network of really supporting a lot of these women and minority-owned businesses to try to get them to, they're really excellent at what they do, and they're the experts. And we have the humility that we're not going to go out and be the best mental health practice. We don't want to do that. We want to help people find the best mental health practice and get them to have corporate contracts and getting more people healthy so the people who don't want to own businesses can continue to go and support their families and do the things they want to do and live the lives that they want. And so connection, I think that we as a species are intended to not do things by ourselves. We are supposed to be in connection with one another, and the I guess persona of the entrepreneur is like the late night under a lamp, go and grind and do everything and mow over at all costs. But what I've really recognized is the people that do that aren't the ones that end up building the $1 billion brands, and aren't the ones that even, make it to the next level, because you really have relationship building is my favorite part about my job. And arguably it's been 95% of my success has been navigating that. I think that kind of takes me to the other part of your question, which is really around debunking that business or maybe even for profit, because I talk about this a lot, that I was very intentional about not building a nonprofit. I wanted it to be for profit because there's a lot that I feel like, money there, and of course there's no challenges with nonprofit. It's a different way of how the money flow goes and how you interact with it. But I think of money as energy, again, in my healing work, right? And the more that I can have come in from the companies that really have a problem to solve, and bringing that through my business and getting that to flow to other companies that didn't have access to those opportunities, we can all generate more money in our communities, and that money flow can go to places of real impact. And I think that when you stop villainizing, it can feel icky if you think, I don't want to monetize my art, or I don't want to monetize my creativity, because it feels daunting, and maybe you're worried that people won't value it. The reality of it is you have a gift, and that gift should be monetized because it is something that is valued. And the more that we move into a space of valuing creativity, which we're absolutely as a society moving towards, it's going to be the counterbalance to this tech boom. Is I think that you should be primed and ready to establish your worth and say what you need to get paid, but also recognize that there will absolutely be a vacuum ready for you if you just are very clear about what you're offering and how you can think about owning that process of money being energy versus money being this weird transaction that I think a lot of creatives think as being a negative thing.
Slightly different, not negating anything you're saying, but a little slightly different view is my career started inside companies, so inside big companies, and I learned a lot. And without that education, I wouldn't have been able to step out and have been as valuable and successful as I was when I first stepped out. I always knew when I was in school that I wanted to be in consulting. I knew that I wanted to be a design consultant in the apparel industry. I knew that. But I also knew that I didn't know enough to right out of school do that. So I basically crafted the early part of my career as a way to gather skills and information. And I let, this part of my career lead me to the next part, to the next part, to the next part. It wasn't like the full thing was crafted, but I knew at a certain point I was going to get to the comfortability level where I was like, okay, I can take this, and I know how I think, and I know how I can bring things to the table. And I know that I've been in enough conversations where I've been frustrated that why, you're inside a company and you're like, why won't they just listen to me? Like, I know how to make this better. I know how to bring this to life. And then you can take that power and knowledge that you have, and you can, step outside of that large company, and you can take those skills, and they are valuable to other places because you have that past experience. I built my whole book of business off of, a portfolio that was created of working at all these other companies. So I had all these proof points of what I was capable of, which I think is like a really valuable thing. Those proof points and that experience enabled me to then be able to create partnerships with all of these large companies when I was working for myself. So whether that was a P&G, or whether that was, one of my biggest clients was Cotton Council International. So that's a trade organization. I was hired by a trade organization to help them globally figure out how to sell cotton to other countries. Like, that's huge. The only reason that they believed in me was because of the skill set I was able to demonstrate to them. And so, like, that's what I would say about a lot of this, is that it's really about gathering those skills and figuring out how to articulate and demonstrate them, and that partnership isn't a dirty word at all. It is definitely something that like needs to happen. That is the only way you're gonna like live. And there's nothing wrong with taking care of yourself, and there's nothing wrong with making sure that you're getting paid. And slightly differently than Stevie, like right off the bat, I was like, I'm getting paid first. Like, if I can't sustain my, and not everybody does this with their career, or when they're taking their entrepreneur thing. I was like, if I can't get paid, I can't do this. So I was like, I was in a position that like I had to make sure that I could pay my bills first. So that's why I like had to gather all of that, that knowledge and capability in order to be able to take that step into entrepreneurship. But yeah, so I think that partnerships are imperative, and I think money is good. And I think that when you have that creative power and you make those partnerships, to kind of touch base on the idea that like that could be a bad thing or a dirty thing. One of the things that I love about the fact that now I'm at Procter & Gamble is that on my own, I had a focus on sustainability and an interest in like making the world a better place. But now I have a platform to influence, where if I can influence P&G to make some changes, the impact that has on the world is much larger. So it's like, whether that's through working internal somewhere or partnering with a large company, you as an individual, whatever your ideals are, you have a huge potential to create impact beyond just yourself or a small project if you really create bigger partnerships and things like that.
Amy, could you, I saw you shaking your head, or like, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, some things I want to say about partnership and collaboration in the space of nonprofit work. So in many ways, our capacity to collaborate with each other as small nonprofits is directly related to our survival, as well as our thriving and the delivery of our mission in an impactful way, in a way that matters, in a way that drives metrics that matter. And so what we've seen, especially in the landscape of nonprofit funding and development since the pandemic, is that coalition-based work, cohort-based work, collaborative-based work is essential for our thriving. And it's really cool to live in a city like Cincinnati that has, in my opinion, a yes and mentality anyways. It's a very highly collaborative, highly creative landscape in which most people that I approach with the concept are like, yeah, and what about this idea? And we find that we're able to coalition build and to really co-create. And I wonder often, I think there's like a little extra permissioning in the nonprofit world toward collaboration because we need it to exist, and because there's often this kind of sense of benevolence around our efforts because they're not oriented to profit margins often. And I think there's a lot to be shared between the business world and the nonprofit world around this concept of partnering and effective management of collaborations and partnerships. So much of it, like we've heard, comes down to relationships. I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. Yeah, speaking of the Enneagram. And 9s are bridge building people. We're highly relational people. We like to find the space that exists between opposition. And there is this like quite historical and long rift between the business world and the nonprofit world that's tangible if you work inside of either or. And what we've seen in the last at least decade is this trending toward that gap being closed, spaces opening up to really build cohesion between business and nonprofit world. And I have a lot of curiosities around who are some businesses that I could identify as a nonprofit leader locally, especially to work with to deepen my impact, to deepen our impact, to do that together. It looks great. It looks great and we do actually work with P&G often. It looks really great for P&G to work with us. It also looks really great for us. And beyond the veneer of, because sometimes collaborations and partnerships are highly motivated by representation or some sort of surface level motivation, when we can also drill down to impact and collective action, that's great too. One more thing about cohort models and cohort-based learning. In my world, learning inside of cohorts is everything. It's everything. So what that ends up looking like is from the informal, hey, want to get coffee once a month and talk about best practices and what you find is really improving your experience out in the community, to a shift in funding models, which is really compelling to me too, which there's a lot of funders who are shifting toward providing funding for nonprofit professionals to be a part of learning cohorts. And so we get to learn best practices around inclusion in research and development, or best practices in technology management or staff management. And we do it together. So I'm a part of several, possibly at this moment too many, but cohort-based models of learning, and I love it because I get a chance to connect with people all over the place who are refining their skills and doing it together and finding, back to a point I made a little bit ago, finding culture building and culture making, because it's what we do. We build culture. Ideally, we're given the spaciousness to build healthy culture together.
Excellent, thanks. I'm going to move on to the next question, and I'm going to flip the order a little bit here. Cheryl, being a person that interacts with a lot of different creatives and helps them with their strategies, what are you seeing as the future trends for creative entrepreneurs? And we'll all have a chance to talk.
I'll tell you, I'm really excited about the things that I've seen recently, I guess because I've been doing this a very long time. There are so many, the format of the Business Accelerator that has really helped many tech companies get up and running is now being applied for musicians and artists. I'm sure you've heard of the Cincinnati Music Accelerator, started by Kik Lee. This is an opportunity for musicians to build businesses around their music, but also some much larger tech accelerators like Generator also has an accelerator for musicians and for artists. Also, the Y Combinator has one for artists as well, and that's the accelerator that grew Dropbox, Airbnb. So some really big opportunities for artists right now.
Jessica, you want to?
Yeah. So building on that a little bit, one of the things that popped into my head as you were talking, Cheryl, is the Urban Manufacturing Alliance. So while there's these tech versions of things that are happening, which are amazing, and there's these nonprofit, more artisan-focused endeavors as well. The Urban Manufacturing Alliance is focused on creating manufacturing businesses, like small and medium-sized manufacturing businesses, and creates a support system for them. I used to be on the board of directors. I'm not anymore, but it is a phenomenal organization, which I know, Steve, you have experience with them as well. So as a resource, if anyone is like talking or thinking about making physical products as an entrepreneur, like that is a really great resource, whether or not you are doing manufacturing yourself or you're seeking out manufacturers. And that's everything from soft goods to hard goods, apparel, food, all sorts of different things. And they support other local organizations that help to help local communities, which is really great. The other thing in regards to like the trends that I have seen is that there's two different things that I think are kind of shifting in the way, whether it's entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship, but people are thinking differently about these two different spaces. And one is that entrepreneurial skills are becoming more and more valuable for larger corporations. So whether you go through this program and you start your own company, or you go through this program and you go internally somewhere, these are skills that are really, really valuable because people are, large organizations as well as startups, right, are needing people to be thinking differently. And entrepreneurs think differently because we're scrappy. We have to kind of like figure it out and there's nobody there to like go to. So we have to kind of just muscle through and figure it out. The other thing that I think is really interesting, and I kind of alluded to it before, is I think that the whole, and I think you had alluded to this as well, the whole idea of neurodivergence being seen as a like benefit versus a detriment. I think that is growing, and I think that really those skills, I think we just didn't understand what a lot of that was. So I think as we grow in understanding that, there's another organization which is really phenomenal. I think it's called Made by Dyslexia. And that organization, Richard Branson is one of the founders of that organization. And it from a lot of different perspectives, reframes like neurodivergence as being a skill or a benefit. They have on LinkedIn, they've partnered with LinkedIn, and now there's like neurodivergent dyslexic skills that you can put on your profile, which I think is incredible. So it's like that reframing of something that may have been seen as, like I said before, detrimental, that now is a benefit. Those are the big things that I'm seeing. And AI, obviously, that is everywhere. Small companies, large companies are trying to figure out how to use that. The one thing that I will say is that I'd be careful and look into ownership. Like if you generate ideas through AI, who really owns that? I think that world is still kind of being figured out. So I would just, if you start to, whether it's generating like a script or it's generating artwork or even copy for an ad or something like that, just be careful, because it's like stay in tune with what is going on with that and how that's evolving over time. So,
Thanks. Anybody else?
I just want to say another very practical thing to keep in mind that I feel this has always been available, but I don't think it has been available to the extent it is now, and that is when you're struggling, remember there is somebody to help you. There's so much opportunity right now. There is money for you, and there is mentorship to help you think big. You don't have to think small, because this is what I can do as one person, as a creative. There is money to help you think big, and there is mentorship and connections to help you think big. And yeah, just keep that in mind. And the landscape has never been better, really, than right now. There's so many opportunities to have money and mentorship, really.
Thank you for saying that, because I think that there's two sides of the spectrum that I just really wanted to quickly touch on. The first is I learned the value in contract manufacturing that we were speaking to when I was at P&G. When I worked on CoverGirl, 80% of the products that we sourced were from overseas contract manufacturers, and it was all about the brand. So when I talked about my love for storytelling and brand building, what I think is really powerful is we sometimes think that when I'll take cosmetics for a second, you want to start a vegan nail company, right? And that you're going to do this and it's going to be great. But you're like, where do I even start? Where do I go formulate the nail polish? Where do I go do the thing? And it's like, there's so much of an opportunity for you to just build something beautiful and amazing that's going to really impact the world by using somebody else's product that's already vetted and being purchased, potentially by other multi-billion-dollar corporations. And I know how that it might make you feel inauthentic or whatever, but I think that the storytelling piece, that creative entrepreneurship, just simply in the bringing an idea and concept to life that could really change somebody's life, you don't have to do the whole thing. I think there's a lot of things happening that are really cool, honestly, on Amazon and with drop shipping and all kinds of stuff that we as creatives can get paid really well to do what we're really good at in that space. On the other end, revolutionary ideas, speaking to AI, we hosted a platform, Wellnext, a couple of weeks ago where we heard Bayer and Novartis coming in talking about, from a pharmaceutical standpoint, how I remember when I started at P&G, we would do these multinational household penetration segmentation tests where we would spend almost $1 million on learning about the habits and practices of individuals, and then taking and aggregated, it would be 6 months. And then by the time we would get ready, the market would have shifted, and it was a whole thing. Now you can literally do that work. Anybody has access to get that kind of data in minutes. Right. And there's vetting that needs to be involved but for the most part, to be honest with you, pharmaceutical companies can get down to, predicting disease state within 95% accuracy of your propensity to need, for example, something, you're going to have a brain tumor in the next 12 months. Like, that's so scary to think about in the wrong hands, but in the right hands, like, how does that open up our minds to think about the possibilities of innovation and really solving a niche issue, but really can have a large impact for a broader group? AI is only going to advance speed to market and solving really big challenges for us. And so I do think that leveraging AI to be creative and to create, yes, but also the insights and data portion that's required to go get the funding that you need to go and generate the ideas, right, that can do the research for you to focus on being a creative is how I've really found that to be really world opening for my organization.
Excellent. We're going to have our last question before we go to a Q&A. And quickly, from each of you, I would like to know, from an educational or life perspective, what do you wish you would have known before starting your journey to now, especially in regards to entrepreneurialism? Cheryl, you want to start, and we'll just go down the line?
I guess what I would have liked to know is a little bit of what I just mentioned. I didn't know there was money available to me. I didn't know that I could have mentors. I really had this, it has to be me, all by myself. And actually, people even advised me not to get a business partner because they thought, that's just trouble. And yes, it can be. But I think shoot high is all I have to say.
I think that is where I would go with it, is that when there's a little bit of a fear sometimes for asking for what you need and asking for what you want. But what I realized is that for the first several years of getting into this, is that I was setting my bar too low. And I think that for being there was something about when it became mine. When I was at P&G, I was so concerned with how slow they were moving and how they weren't, taking enough risk, because I'm a big risk taker, and a lot of people see that in me externally, but there's a lot of steps that I'm very risk averse, and I have 18 parallel pathways in to be ready for anything. And that is, while exhausting, something that also limited my ability to dream bigger because I was so worried about risk. And I really wish that, if I were to go back, and I would have just done it and done more and dream bigger and said, this is what it's going to be, and really followed more of my heart on that versus my brain. And I think that, like I said, that's where I'm at now, which is great. Expressing that muscle can be really scary, but it's very exciting.
So I'm thinking about the potency and impact of missional thought, mission impact statement writing especially, and how that's really supported me in focusing my efforting. in my personal and my professional life. And so when I first started, I don't think I really knew much about how to focus my attention and my concepting. And it's grown into now for me with each project, I like to know, who am I to this project? What's my role? What is the what? What's the process? Why does it matter to me? Why is it important to my collaborators and potentially the community? And then also, what kind of impact do I want to have? And those questions and the way that I relate to them now have been so useful and supportive. And so I've actually started to teach that process to high school students, because I think like I would have loved to have known how to focus myself in this specific impact-oriented kind of way. And then that also provides all sorts of opportunities for reflection, which kind of comes back to one of our earlier questions around self-knowing. Am I who I think I am? And how do I know? And impact and measuring our impact is a huge, huge way of knowing whether we're doing what we say we're doing, internally and externally.
I wish I would have known that even if everything falls apart, you're going to be okay. And I had a company for 5 years. I got really sick, and it was right at the beginning of COVID when I found out what it was. And because of that, I did not have the literal energy, I was sleeping 18 hours a day. I did not have the literal energy to take care of my business. And so that was a really scary time. And it was a time where, I did not have, I thought I did not have a safety net. And that seemed terrifying to me. So literally my business fell apart. But at the same time, within weeks, I got offered a job at Procter & Gamble, and I had 3 months before I had to start that job at Procter & Gamble. So I had time to kind of get through a lot of that stuff that I was going through from a physical aspect. The way I refer to it when I'm talking to my mom is that I hit rock bottom, but my bounce back has been pretty fucking good. So just know that there are people out there to help you, even if things seem like they are falling apart, even if you're afraid to take the leap because you're afraid they could fall apart. Yes, be thoughtful, do your planning ahead of time, talk to people, figure out as much as you can ahead of time. But just know that there's always a plan B. There's always another thing that is going to pop up. There's always people to help you. So don't not take, if you have something you're passionate about and you believe in, don't not take the risk of doing it. Don't live in that regret. Know that you can always figure out a second path forward, and actually be really, really happy and good at it. So, and it doesn't mean in the future that I won't be an entrepreneur again, but I'm learning these different skills, and nothing lasts forever. So it's okay for things to evolve or fail or fall apart, because then you get to move on to the next thing. And as scary and hard as that is in the moment, I think that's a really important thing for us to kind of think through when we're going into entrepreneurship. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, it piggybacks off of who you collaborate with and the people around you. Those people become your support network. So when something does happen, they have your back, and that's why it's so important not to do a lot of this stuff on your own. So now I'd like to open it up to the audience. If you have any questions, let me know, and I can pass the baton, and can have our panelists.
Hi, I just have a question about after you have an idea of something that you want to start, kind of what is the logistical path that you take? What's the next step? Because I have no idea. Thank you.
What kind of idea do you have? Is it a product? Is it a business? Is it
Anything.
Yeah, okay.
I guess a lot of us in here are product designers, so I don't know,
Okay.
idea or a company, consultancy, whatever.
Lots of research. Yeah, I would say that it's understanding who your customer is. It's understanding what problem you're trying to solve for that customer. It's the design process. You know, if you really look at like design thinking and that process, it's going through that. That is a great beginning model for like jumping into figuring out what you're going to do for a business. That's something we use on a daily basis, even at like Procter & Gamble. You know what I mean? So that process is a really good tool to kind of be like, am I thinking this through? Am I understanding what the problem is that I want to solve? And how do I uniquely do that? And kind of identify those things. And I think that that can help you flesh out, like, is this a good thing? Is this something I can really do? Or is this something that maybe I need to like evolve a little bit more? Or maybe that's not my thing. I set that to the side and I come up with like a different thing. But putting it through that vetting, I think, is like a good thing.
There is a model called the Business Canvas model. It is a one-page sheet with about, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 questions on it, which is meant to be kind of a mini template for a business plan. And it kind of walks you through a lot of great questions. Who is my target audience? What need am I solving? And it's very similar to what Jessica was talking about, but it's very specific for your business. And I think the trick with using either of these models and just being an entrepreneur in general is you have to balance your enthusiasm and your motivation and the positive self-talk that tells you that you can do it with being realistic. And after you've done your research, if it says it's not going to work, get a new plan. But you have to be able to discern what's you needing a little more courage, and this really is not going to work. But both of these models are going to help you, and it's called the Business Canvas model. And it's just a very simplified business plan template.
I would add 2 quick layers. One is to really ask yourself if it's a concept that you have enough passion behind to motivate you when it gets difficult, because it will get difficult. And so how much do you love it? And that's so translatable and palpable to any audience, any customer, collaborator. People can tell what your internal motivations are pretty easily. They're easily read. And so just know yourself around that. And then I also want to add a layer around, I think it's always useful to map social assets too, to have a sense of who are your relational assets, your role-based assets, the people who are going to support you when stuff gets weird and hard. Mentors, we've talked about mentors a couple of times. I heavily rely on my mentors, and I have mentors in different categories of my life and my work and my efforts. And I know who to call, and they're folks with a ton of life experience, wisdom, and also the generosity to sit with me. And I don't know where I would be without having like quite a few mentors that I can call.
Okay, any other questions?
Hi. So more on the business side of things, say if you were starting a consultancy or selling a good or a product or a service, starting your own business, would you choose to sign up as an LLC or a B Corp, or like where would you get started with the actual business side of things? Thanks.
I think that's a really excellent question, and it's also a very personal question with a very personal answer. I have an LLC, and I'm a sole owner of that. If I had gone back in time, I probably would have been a B Corp, because we're already acting that way. We already give away so much to our small business owners in terms of value. But I do think that there's a lot of value also being structured as an S Corp as well from a tax benefit perspective. The great news is that as you go along, that there's no restriction in you redefining what that looks like, no matter where you are on the journey. And I think that that's one of the things that, if you're just looking to get started, I mean, people restructure or create separate holding companies even after they get acquired, to operate as a separate entity. So I think it's more about how congruent, especially the B Corp, is a part of your mission and your end goal. And then taking a look at, like I said, from a tax structure standpoint, I've highly considered switching to an S Corp just because of the way that I'm already paying myself. But I think that an LLC's just kept things really easy and flexible for me as a founder, that if I need to do a draw at a certain time or ramp up or ramp down, my biggest thing that I would say is, like, even more from a tax structure standpoint is understanding if you are going to take, I'll give you an example. If you are going to take investment dollars, that's where I would just get more clear. I believe that if you take investment dollars, an S Corp is probably a better, don't quote me, I'm not an expert in this, but I think that that's where it really becomes interesting because the money flow. But for me, I took founding member dollars and made a commitment for services for 2 years. So that way they didn't own any part of the company, and there was no payback. And there's just different ways to think about, like, the money flow in and out from a tax purposes. There's benefits and cons there.
Have you looked at the requirements to become a B Corp? Okay. They are very strict. They're really, really involved. And I'm not saying it's not worth it, but you should be prepared for what it is. And you know what I would do? And I'll tell you this because my first company was a sustainable products company, and we did everything very environmentally friendly. Mission was in every single part of what we did. And back then, the B Corp was a new concept. And when I looked at the application process, I decided I didn't want to do it. And I had already been doing all of it. But to prove it was a lot of work. And so I guess my advice is take a look at the application and sort of build it into your model from the start. If you think it's something you want to do, it's totally worth it. But know what it is so that as you're constructing your business, you're making sure that you're meeting the requirements of the B Corp from the very beginning, and it'll make that application process a lot easier for you. Yeah.
I would say, so sorry. I would say that, like, the B Corp is fantastic. That's an amazing thing. But kind of building off what Cheryl was saying, when you're starting your company, right? Like, you have limited time and energy and capability, and anything else that's going to get in your way from being able to get a product or out the door is going to be. And what I mean by that is not that you wouldn't also follow all of, like, the good things that a B Corp is doing, but the having to prove it and having to jump through those hoops, like, that's just going to add more work to you. So it's not that I'm trying to say don't do it. I'm just saying be very cognizant of that, is like it will add extra work. So
one thing I was going to say is that when I started my business, I got some advice to go to the Small Business Association, and they have them in just about every city in the United States. And a lot of times what they have there is they have retired finance, accounting professionals that will work with small businesses to get them going and get some really good advice that way.
How do you see e-commerce and art and e-commerce on the internet? Maybe
The relationship between art and selling art through e-commerce.
I don't have a ton of experience with that per se, but I do know a lot of, it's so interesting if you think of, like, what happened over COVID with, like, NFTs and all of that kind of thing. Because I feel like we had, like, this, like, oh my God, this is the next big thing. And now, like, you never hear about it. So I think that there's waves that happen with that kind of stuff. And there's, like, the flash in the pan kind of thing. I do think that art, from a perspective of AI, it's going to evolve a lot. What is art? How do we define that? And also, like, how do we figure out how to, like, still enable artists to exist and, like, be paid properly if all of a sudden an agency can do something really quick or something like that. So I don't know necessarily about the e-commerce part as much as I see that, like, the art world from a digital perspective is evolving in, like, big ways right now. So that's probably the extent that I can.
Are you interested in selling art online?
yeah, through a website.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I think that if you want to be an artist who makes a living, it's imperative that you learn how to operate on the internet, and for multiple reasons. I have many friends who have done a circuit of fine art and craft shows for years, and with global warming and climate change, those shows are becoming, besides them being extremely time consuming, they were becoming very unpredictable ways to make a living, and they're very time consuming and they're exhausting. And so if you can learn how to sell online, become very good at social marketing, Etsy, all the e-commerce, but also putting yourself out there to connect with micro and macro influencers who can talk about your work. I think that it's great to have galleries and having in-person stuff like shows, but you have to do all of it. And doing it online is a huge part of selling art right now.
I was just going to say one of the things that we're really seeing, not just with art, but any commodity, is from a TikTok shop perspective, it's the single biggest opportunity that you have for ease of transaction if you are looking for mass, right? The Warhol approach. When you're looking at niche, I firmly believe that community and niche communities will be the way forward for anybody looking to really deepen relationships and loyalty. So I think it's really your end objective of how you're looking. If you're looking to, basically sell to millions of people, or if you want to sell one, I think that starting with social and building any sort of community, it doesn't mean you getting in front of an audience and dancing, right? It's a think about it as a storytelling platform. But I think that the ease that TikTok has made for you to be able to hit buy or to engage with that secondary when you go down the funnel of, awareness and preference and getting into like that trial. If you think about getting down into the funnel, that there's a lot of really great work happening in the art world of having these like secret suppers or having private engagements and experiences that are an investment, but it's hyper premium experiences are kind of the new currency because it's like the Mandela effect. Like they happen once and then they go away. And I feel like that's like it's just a distinction between who your audience is.
Okay, we got one quick one. We got another class coming in at 1:15, so one last one.
Hey guys, this is a quick and easy one. As a new entrepreneur, where do you start to find funding?
If you connect with a business art accelerator, they will connect you with investors. And if you want to connect with me, I can help you. Or anybody. We can maybe make some of those resources available to people.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
I was going to say I explored small business funding when I was looking at building a brick and mortar location first. So small business loan, and the rates were pretty reasonable at the time. But as I'd mentioned previously, I've never taken any funding outside of, I did the raise based on, it was a friends and family, but the structure of it was not an investment dollar. It was more of like a trade for services.
Sometimes when people are trying to make the choice between becoming an LLC and a 501c3, which is a nonprofit, the choice is weighed based on whether or not they want to try to be able to apply for funds and grants that are local, federal, and available for specifically 501c3 based organizations. And so if you do find yourself going in the nonprofit route, also similarly available for those kind of conversations. But I also noticed that funds and grants development is highly relational. So the folks who run organizations that give money to small arts organizations like mine, they want to know me. They want to know what my team is up to. They want regular updates. We get coffee together. We get to know each other in a way that has authenticity, is not just dependent on the economics of the relationship. So I think that carries through cross sector. Relationships really matter when it comes to development and to funds, and just meeting people who might want to extend their dollars, their resources in your direction. They're going to want to know who you are and why you believe in what you believe in, what you're up to in the world.
And then I'll talk about my experience. My experience is different than going and getting funding from anywhere else. I was internal at a company, and when I told them that I was going to step away, I said I still would like to maintain a relationship with you. I would like to have you as my first client. And two things happened. Three things. First, they said no. And then like 2 weeks later, they came back and they said, if you stay with us till the end of the year, we'll give you your bonus. And so that was like, oh, yes, sign me up for that. So I stayed with them to the end of the year. I got a chunk of money, and then they were my first client after that. That enabled me to have a good runway to be able to okay, I've got the next 6 months covered financially. So now anything that happens on top of that is awesome. And during that time, I just did tons of networking. I went to a lot of trade shows. I started to create as many either create or leverage as many of the relationships that I already had as I could. And I just was in front of people, and then I was posting a lot. I started to do my social media for my brand, and show and talk about the things that were interesting to me and that I wanted to kind of be known for and develop. So then the next client came, and then so it kind of just tumbled into me being profitable right off the start. So if you are internal at a company and you are deciding to become a consultant, talk to that company as you are, planning to make your exit. Tell them that they could still potentially be somebody that you would like to work for if that is, the case. It worked out for me. I know other people that have also done similar things.
Okay. Due to time constraints, we have to cut this off. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, panelists. And thank all of you for coming in and asking great questions. We will have another one in the fall, and that will be with some Bay Area designers from corporate and consulting, primarily in industrial design and exhibit design. Thanks.